Okay, fantastic. Well, welcome everyone to day 2 of the Grant Writing for Federal Funding course hosted by the Wallace Center's Food Systems Leadership Network. So nice to have you all here today. I'm Annalena Kazikas. I work with the Wallace Center helping to coordinate the FSLN. This is a 3-part training delivered by, as I mentioned yesterday, a pretty stellar group of trainers. And I think we can all agree to that. Una Van Duvall and Margaret Krome, who I'll be introducing just a little bit later. These recordings or these sessions will be recorded, but again, thank you for your patience as we get those uploaded, and we'll get them out to you as soon as possible. Quick little overview on tech. We are in a Zoom webinar, so everyone is muted and off video. Please definitely use the chat box to communicate with each other. Great place to meet, exchange contacts, comments, etc. And then the Q&A box, which is also down at the bottom of your toolbar, is a really good space to ask more specific questions so they don't get tangled within the chat box. And we are monitoring both of those throughout the call, so hopefully we'll be able to answer any questions that do come up. As I mentioned earlier, this training is hosted by the Food Systems Leadership Network, which is a national peer learning community of people and organizations across the country working towards more just, equitable, and sustainable food systems. So we create opportunities for food systems leaders to meet each other, to learn from each other, to learn with each other, and really work together to create more equitable food systems. Do this through a variety of different ways. We have mentorship programs, leadership retreats, topical calls, and an online platform where everything is housed. And this training is, one of the technical assistance programs that we do offer under what we call the Nonprofit Boot Camp series. And this is all nuts and bolts strategies for best practices around nonprofit management, operations, development. And here are some of the past trainings that we have posted, which you can check out on our online platform as well. So today we are joined by Margaret Krome and Una Van Duvall to really dig into part 2 of today of how to design, write, and access federal funding for your food systems programs. Quick introduction to these two change makers here. Margaret Krome is the policy director at the Michael Fields Agricultural Institute, where she coordinates the annual national grassroots campaign to fund federal programs. She also supports environmentally sound, profitable, and socially responsible agricultural projects and conducts workshops nationwide on grant writing and using federal programs to support sustainable ag, such as this training today. Una Van Duvall holds multiple hats. She is the president of the board of directors for Odessa School of Fashion, chairperson of fundraising for Nicodemus Homecoming Committee, communications director for Wisconsin State Conference of the NAACP, and a city and state contractor for a variety of different planning projects and developments. So thank you both so much again for being here and walking us through day 2 of this. I will hand it over to you and let's get started.
Terrific.
Welcome to day 2, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Terry, I hope you saw Andrew's request. He responded to you, so make sure you see that. It's great.
Okay.
All right.
So we didn't want to start the day without our 2 particularly cute pigs. So these are some of our favorite hogs. Today is the second day, as Annalena said, in the series of these 3, and today we are going to talk about identifying possible funding. Yesterday we talked about designing sound projects. Today it's identifying possible funding. Tomorrow it's grant writing basics. And it didn't let me go all the way back. I was so pleased with myself for having moved it to the second stage. Here we are now. So this is just a quick recapture of yesterday's workshop. We went through, we had a moment where we asked everybody to give us your best ideas in the chat box of what you think have been some of the indicators of a program that's well designed, something that when you see it, just living your life, you think, oh, that's going to be a winner. That's going to succeed. And what we heard from a lot of you was it's got to have goals that address the needs, specific needs, well-researched needs, or opportunities if you're talking about a business, measurable objectives, an approach, a work plan, strategies, methods, whatever you're doing, the organized system for moving your actual work forward on a realistic timeline with other collaborators, not too many, well chosen, resources that recognize that you will have some of those resources and then you have to go about systematically figuring out what you need. And then a communications plan that figures out who needs to know about whatever you're doing, and strategies for reaching them, and then anticipated, pre-planned mechanism for evaluating, for checking out how successful you're going to be. How are you doing? So that's what yesterday covered. And today we're talking about how to go out finding funding. And we're going to start with the broad idea that I call casting out the net. In other words, the first set of questions is what's out there that might be helpful. And then unless you really, really want to spend pretty much every minute of your waking hours writing grant proposals and maybe conservation contracts and so forth, presumably you're going to need to cull. You can't possibly apply to all of possibilities. Many of them are not quite suited. And so we're going to talk about how we go about finding the correct one.
So let me say this to everybody too, Margaret, just a second. Remember yesterday, we talked about the fact that don't go looking for the money. Start to develop your thinking about your program and try and look for dollars that better match, because you will never be able to apply for everything. So this is culling and making sure that what you do start to look at really starts to match up with what you're trying to do. It won't be 100%, but you start to actually not just chase after the dollars because someone released RFP, something that you could apply for. Great.
So today we're going to talk about where do you find possibilities, and then what are the questions that you use to distill out the ones that are the best choices and to cull. And then where do you find that information to answer those questions? So we will start, we're going to come back to this guide. This is the one we spoke of yesterday. It's the guide that we, every farm bill, we wait a few months, sometimes several months after the farm bill is passed to wait until the dust has settled. And then we put together this guide, which we have in hard copies, and we've had a lot mailed to you. The National Center for Appropriate Technology, the ATRA project that they hold, they actually are willing to mail it to you. And many of them have, many of you have gotten a copy already. You also can download it, and it will be in the chat box so that you can get an access to it. We'll be using it later today. So this would be a good time, Annalena or Andrew, if you wanted to put that link into the chat box so that people have it on hand so that they can download it. Perfect. Yeah. Thanks much, everybody. Yeah. We'll come back to it. This is an example of one way to find funding. There are plenty of other ways to find funding. In addition to the guide I just mentioned, we'll work through later on, there is another kind of a sibling guide that I really think is terrific, and it has an advantage over the one that we do. Ours is intended to be kind of a menu, and it gives you some information, and then you go online and get a lot more information. This one is it's put out by the National Sustainable Ag Coalition, and it's the Grassroots Guide to Federal Farm and Food Programs. And it goes into much more, each of the entries goes into more of the history, some of the policy, and it is able to be updated. They don't have as many, but it's a really great publication, and it's something that you can see online, and the link is there. So when you come back and get a copy of this later, you can easily find that link and get that copy. There are several resources within the USDA. I've given a few here that's not exhaustive. It's just an example of some of the other resources that federal agencies put forward. Now, here's an interesting thing. This workshop has taught me something that I needed to know, and it happened not long before we started today. So Una and I were talking a little while ago, and I usually have had people go to www.grants.gov, and they have a mechanism that I have listed out here, and you can read this later on. You don't have to memorize it now, but about how you navigate their system to tell them, hey, USDA, or hey, grants.gov, would you please send me information about this kind of a program or that? And they give you a selection mechanism for doing that. And Una just pointed out to me that there is another website, which is actually much more recent and easier to use. And it's designed specifically to answer a bunch of questions around how you can find funding, but then we'll come back to this later on. It's also a great place to get a couple of the numbers that you're going to need to actually write proposals later on. So
and let me jump in and say that the reason that we want you to go there is that it is free. A lot of people will offer to help you with that. And then when you get to the end of it, they're going to want you to pay. This one is free for you. So make a note of that.
SAM.gov. It used to be, it's the catalog of federal domestic assistance has been brought into this.
Brought together, exactly.
So it used to be its own thing, and now it's here.
Integrated.
So they have brought together a lot of resources for this one. Thank you, Una, for teaching me a thing this morning.
That's okay.
That was great.
I'm learning a lot from the guide, so we're good.
So when you are thinking about where you go to get funding, the first thing you need to do is to think creatively and broadly about your project's needs. What is it that you need? Years and years ago, we're really talking back in the mid to late 90s, when I first started doing these workshops, I did one with somebody who, I was out in Montana, and this guy had actually seen a copy of this guide, and he said, that really helped me start my business. And I said, what did you use? He said, well, I went to the NRCS, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, part of USDA. And I said, I'm wanting to start a composting business. Well, they didn't care whether I had a business or I didn't have a business, but what they cared about was that I was next to a river, and I was going to be dealing with a lot of manure and livestock manure. And they said they would be interested in helping me, and they had funding to support my getting some of the equipment that I needed and the infrastructure I needed to compost those nutrient sources in a way that was not going to contaminate the river. And that turned out to be an important strategy. So they hadn't anticipated that that was going to be their path. But the point is, you have to think as broadly as you can. What is it that we need to get done? Sometimes you can't find a program that meets the need you thought you had, and yet you can say, well, I could pay for that. Maybe they could pay for this other thing. So think carefully about what you actually need, and are there multiple sources you could go to? And then this next point is the one that used to make the director of the partnership program at the Risk Management Agency, Bill Buchanan, used to say to me, Margaret, just say that a few times, would you? This is the one. He said, it's important to identify programs whose purposes and resources are suitable to you and where you can advance the program's purposes. So we have a bunch of questions that we just try to ask ourselves before going and seeking funding. And Una, take it away.
Right. This section of it is, how do you want to advance your program, and what are you going to do to start culling through the mounds of links and things that we want to do? So we first started looking at, you have to know what your goal and mission is. So we started there, and that's why that was your assignment last night. And thank you, because so many of you did it. We're going to just take 3 or 4 examples today and kind of work through that and see how we do. But really, we wanted to see, we looked at your statement of mission and your objectives, what projects has the funder that you're going to fund it in the past. Sometimes you want to look back and see whatever department or whatever you're looking at, what have they funded that is similar or compatible with whatever you might be trying to do. So this is where you get to be a little bit creative. How big is the program, and how much do they give away? One of the questions that came up yesterday was, hey, I'm a small organization and some of these grants are very large. So my suggestion for that person that feels that they're in the 3 to 5 to 7, maybe the $10,000 range, then look around for what's local, maybe the federal grant, or do a partnership with someone else. And there's no reason that you couldn't maybe work together. So these are some of the creative things that you're going to have to give yourself time to think about as you go for funding. Who is eligible? Are you eligible? And that's again where
we'll
that
come, but can I,
come
before
back.
we get to that, can I just do this one before we go to
Sure,
the next
let's do one.
Yeah, okay. So I just wanted to reiterate a couple of these important ones here on this slide, which is in terms of the program, it's important to keep in mind that the program exists. Programs don't come into existence for no reason at all. They actually have legislated purposes, and they have to be funding things that are accommodating that and advancing those purposes. And anytime they put out a grant call for proposals, and we'll go into that later, they will tell you what they're trying to get, what they care about, what they want. And you can ask yourself, could it maybe help me? That's a perfectly legitimate question. But the critical question is, could what I want to do advance that program's mission and goals?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the thing that is probably almost the most important thing you can start to orient yourself about. Can I make a compelling and legitimate case that what I want to do is advancing what they're telling me they want to be funding? And then the second thing here about forms of assistance that are appropriate to your needs. Some programs offer conservation contracts like the one I just mentioned. Some of them offer loans. Some of them offer assistance and technical assistance. Some of them offer funding for operating capital. Some of them for planning, for business planning, for market feasibility studies. You want to know what kind of assistance this program is offering you, and is it consistent with, appropriate to what you want?
No, that's great. I think, Margaret, what we talked about is unless we just want to do those questions that we've talked about, do you want to talk about the reimbursement, or do you just want to walk through some of the homework, and we'll include these things as we come up on them? How do you want to take that?
We'll do that. We'll do that when we've gone through the slide. That's why we're going to get through, and then we'll do we'll do three of these samples at the end.
And that'll take us. Okay. So again, these are the questions that you need to ask yourself. How big is the funding pool? And what is the average grant amount of the funder that you're applying for? This is a little homework that you need to do about the place that you're going to be looking for to apply to. Don't just assume that you're going to know everything. Do a little work, look into their annual reports, start to look at information that may be public. Sometimes the newspaper articles about what they granted the year before is very handy to give you some idea. Again, if it's legislation, you want to know what is the funder's mission and what are they trying to accomplish. Do you want to talk about the reimbursement of the grant?
Sure.
Yeah, let me say that more than not, grants are going to be reimbursable. So you want to do your budget with the mind that you're going to have something to work with as you begin to do the project. And then let's both talk a little bit about the match that's required.
Sure. And you're right about that, the reimbursement issue. It's really important, I think. Sometimes people think, how wonderful, I'm going to be getting a check in the mail. And there are indeed programs that do it that way.
Yes.
Some programs do. Not every single program, federal program or otherwise, does this on a reimbursement basis. Most do. And some, in fact, split it so that you could get a upfront payment to get going and then get reimbursed. It's variable. Every single program has its own history, its own culture, its own rules, and you can't assume on the basis of what you've experienced with one program that another would be like it.
And let me drop a little backstory in. One of the reasons that funders like to have you maybe do something, they'll give you a little startup. They like it to be reimbursable because they want you to complete the task. And they want to make sure that you're sustainable enough to spend their dollars safely. I'll let you take it back from there.
Sure. So when it comes to match, there are all sorts of things to keep in mind. For one thing, not every program requires match. Many of them do. And if it's a federal program and they're asking for match, they want non-federal match. That is to say, you can't say, oh, I'm getting an NRCS contract and I can use that as match for my, whatever other proposal, my value-added producer grant program proposal. You can't actually. If they ask for match, it's going to almost certainly, if it's federal, it's going to almost certainly be non-federal match that they want. And we talked a little bit before about match, and it can come in various forms. Some of it's actual cash match. Some of it is what's called in kind. That is IN-kind. That means the things that's not cash, basically. And those sometimes get into some additional quirky things. Suppose there's a match. Let's just say you got to provide 20% of whatever the total is. Sometimes it's 50-50. It can be, every program's different. If they have match at all, it can be variable. But whatever it is, there are programs, for an example, I'll give you the value-added producer grant program. That program, as we'll talk about later, its uses are restricted in the sense that you can't use it to build facilities. It's just not what we call bricks and mortar kind of a program. Right. And what that means in terms of match is you can't use a building that you've got as match for it either. So you should just be aware, you really want to look at what the match requirements are. They can vary. On to you.
Carmen asked, can she borrow for her match? And I want to say that what you also want to know is to really carefully read the language around match. Don't I've got this much money in the bank. It depends on your organization and how your balance sheet is, whether or not you choose to or can borrow. And it also depends on how much grant you're applying for. The match will have different percentages. Some matches will require more than others. So that is going to be something that you really have to sit down maybe with your finance committee or someone who's doing your books to make sure that that fits together so that you're not putting your organization at risk for one grant. But that's a great question, Carmen. Thank you.
This is you.
Oh, okay. Well, I was busy answering. Okay. Well, again, I talked a lot about timing yesterday, so I'm going to just say this is a segment that you can't overlook. What is the program's deadline? Now, we talked yesterday about there's a project and a program. The program's deadline, some people said, oh, we want to start up in 6 months. Is that realistic? It may go a year. It may go 18 months. So do you understand how the program timeline impacts your funding and your ability to pay for things that you need when you need them? So you need to really kind of map that out on a calendar, a chart, a graph, or something, so you know that the programs is overlapping the activities that you want to do. So hopefully they land within reasonable stretch of each other for the dollars that you have for the program outcomes. So, does a pre-proposal process stretch out the application process timeline? Not necessarily. Now, a lot of other grants that I've worked with have a letter of intent, and you may need to apply for that before you get invited in. Most foundations I know use this method now. Not so much federal government, they're pretty straightforward, but if you're doing smaller grants, local grants, there may be a letter of intent or something that you have to catch up and apply for, and then they look at your idea and decide if you can come back in. For those of you that were concerned about being intimidated by big federal grants, and you might want to start with somebody local, a local foundation. I think most places have a Whole Foods or some organic food grower that may have small grants. Look and get to know those and see if they have a letter of intent or a pre-process. It shouldn't stretch your timeline process out. What it can do is help you understand how much more information you're going to need to complete that proposal. So the question is, then the final portion that
can I stop on that one real quick?
Yeah,
just to give you an example of a case where it does. For example, if you're wanting to put in a proposal to the Sustainable Agriculture Research Education Program, they have different kinds of categories. If you want to put in a farmer rancher grant, which is a smaller grant, they don't require a pre-proposal. You just put in the proposal. Same sort of a thing if you're putting in a proposal for, at least in the north central part of the state, the Midwestern part of the SERE program. I don't know if it's true for all the 4 regions, but for that piece of the program, if you're putting in what's called a PDP, which is a program, it's basically a train the trainers part of the SERE program, they don't have a pre-proposal at all. But if you're putting in a proposal for the big research and education programs, you do have a pre-proposal process. And that, for example, you have to get your proposal in, I want to say the proposal is due in October. The pre-proposal is due in October. And that means you won't find out if you're even allowed to put in a full proposal until January. And then you'll get an opportunity to put in a proposal. And so it has stretched out that application process. It's meaning it's added about 3 months, so that if you're looking to figure out, when can I maybe get a grant? Actually, if I succeed at getting it, when might it start? Sometimes those pre-proposal processes can actually add months to the timeline. So
1 to 3 generally, if we really do it. Someone just asked, did the match have to be the full amount of the grant that's being requested? Generally, no, but read the application. It can be 20%, it could be 50%. It varies with the funding. So be very particular about how you read it. I say read that section at least 4 or 5 times. And maybe print it out and read it. Sometimes you can read things online, but when you print them out, they appear to be totally different. Be prepared sometimes to take a little time with that. This question about what the duration, I agree. Terry just said to everyone, think about a year. So this is why this is a good time. We want you to take from this point forward as a learning community and start to think about your 2023 2022 late year and 2023 granting opportunities. What's the duration of a program's grant, and does it fund multi-year projects? It can. Margaret, let's talk. You got an example that you can give them about the one that does that? I have a couple, but I wanted you to weigh in on the farm one.
Sure. So I just mentioned the Sustainable Agriculture Research Education Program, SERE. And SERE, different programs offer different things. If you're a graduate student, it's offering you a 1-year opportunity. But if you're looking for a more comprehensive kind of a grant, it can be up to 3 years. And so it depends on, what do I need? Do I really need one of those great big ones or not so much? And so it just is important to find out, what do you need? And does this program accommodate that kind of duration?
Perfect. I think again, all we can say is allow yourself time. I think that Terry just summed it up again good in her chat. If you're getting the chats, Annalie, we're going to ask, are the chats preserved with the recording as well? Someone asked that question. I just wanted to make sure we answer it for them.
Yes, we should be able to share that out.
All right. I just want to, as they come up, I just want to make sure I am monitoring these for us. So yes, if I can get it answered, that's great. Someone just asked in the question, what about applying for various federal grants to support aspects of your project? Blending grants sometimes is allowed and sometimes it may not be. Again, the example of that is that like we just talked about, sometimes you can't match federal against federal. So you have to have, usually the mix for me is sometimes government and something private or a foundation or something from your donor base if you should have one. That's usually a pretty good mix, and you'll be able to bring those dollars together for your objectives. Someone just asked, can you mix state and federal? Let me just say this. Sometimes state and federal are using the same source. For instance, sometimes USDA or HUD, they have a federal allocation from the same federal pot, and you may not be able to mix them, even though the state has its own allocation and the federal has its own. So be very careful, because the accountants will go to the original funding source by law. If you're a nonprofit and you have your own dollars, of course. Margaret?
Just wanted to get on to the, can we get into the eligibility?
Yep.
Pieces here. Just conscious that if we're gonna get to any of our samples, we're gonna need
Yeah,
to
I wanted to,
hustle
that's
here.
right. Let's go. Yeah.
Eligibility. You want to take that one?
Well, I mean, I think, again, there are several eligibilities. Generally, in some of these, you're a 501c3 or a LLC. But the idea is that those things will be spelled out in your call for proposal. You have to determine if you're eligible, or if you have some part of your organization that you are eligible. Oh yeah, send, you guys, be sure you send the chat to everyone, not just to the panelists and not just to a person. Look at the top of your box. So the eligibility requirements and restrictions are going to be listed in that call for proposal. So be
Here,
sure
I can
that
give
you.
you I can give
I'm
you
sorry?
a
Good
good
example.
ag version, an ag example of that.
Okay, good.
The value added producer grant program is a wonderful program. And if you're a nonprofit, you can't apply. If you're a farmer or a group of farmers, you can apply. I already mentioned that it's not able to be used for bricks and mortar. It's able to be used for planning. It's able to be used for operating capital. So there are things that programs can do, and things that they will fund and won't fund. And that has to do with how they originally got started and what the original purposes of their creation was. So last item here is what I call the hassle factor. And that is, you want to find out, is this program worth it? Like, for the amount of money that we might potentially be able to get for the period that we want to get it, is it an easy enough program to work with? There are programs that are a breeze to work with, just such a pleasure, no big sweat. And then there are programs that, ooh, you think that's a lot of worry. Like, I had a proposal, had a grant one time from an agency that I won't mention right this minute, but I'll just say it was quarterly reports, and it was a nuisance. And what I do, you're not going to find information about that from the sources we're about to tell you on, like reading the RFP, but you can find from past grantees. What do they think? I'm going to just
That's
suggest
a good point.
ways to answer all those different questions that Una just walked through. First thing to do is to read the request for proposals. It's called different things. Sometimes it's called the call for proposals, or notice of solicitation of applications, or request for applications, all these different names. It means the same thing. It's usually rather poorly written, very tiny print, a pain in the neck to read. You got to read it several times, but it's critical to read it, and you'll be rewarded right now as you're figuring out whether the program's suited for you, and you'll be rewarded when you write your proposal if you read it several times. It's on the program website. You can get it from the linkages that we just shared. You can find it in our guide, all sorts of places. But that RFP is going to be the single best place to get information about, is this program suited for me? Second, many programs these days, it started about 6-8 years ago, and now it's become almost normal that when a program puts out a call for proposals, they very commonly do a webinar for potential applicants, and they often will put that online even if you don't get there for the webinar itself. But a lot of people ask the questions that you might yourself have asked. That's a great thing to do. A couple other things for sure: call the program staff after you've looked at these other sources. And if you really aren't clear, does this program meet my needs? Could it potentially meet my needs? Call the program staff. They very much want you to do it. They will tell you that's their job. They want to be able to help answer questions. After you've done your due diligence, call them if you can't answer it any other way. And then, as I said, if you're wanting to find out about the hassle factor, ask past grantees. So we're going to do a little bit of a dive very quickly here into this guide. We don't have a ton of time, but I'm going to take a few steps here and I'm going to show you. So maybe could somebody put back into the chat box the link to the guide? If somebody would be willing to do that, for those of you who have
I'll drop it in.
If you haven't yet received it, here's a copy of the guide. And I just took a few snapshots of a few pages. This is not intended to be comprehensive, but it's intended to show you how to use the guide. So we used to do an alphabetical listing, and we do that in the index now in the back. So if you know the name of a program, you can go to the index and find it. But a lot of people don't know what program. So what we decided to do was to categorize them, to kind of lump them together. So we have this whole cluster here on economic development for farms, businesses, and communities. Another bunch on farm loans, insurance and risk management, local food systems. We have natural resources conservation and management, nutrient and consumer food access, renewable energy and energy conservation, research and outreach. And one of the other things, our wonderful colleague, Donnell Richards, this year did something which is really helpful. And that is he made little symbols for those different clusters. So he had the symbols for the people who could use a program. So on the right-hand side, that little box, you'll see a page that shows you some of those little things. Like there's a little barn. If you're a farmer or you're a processor or a landowner, you would see look for the little thing that shows farmers. The universities, institutions, that's the funny looking building. And then you have all these other little symbols. And as you go through the guide, you will see, and I've just given you a couple of examples, you will see where the symbols there are on the edge of the page, the margin of the page. So you can go through the guide and say, oh, there's a farmer symbol. I wonder what that is. And that'll help give you some sense of how you navigate. This is a program that we do need to talk a tad about. We will when we come to the next section, which is looking at actually how to use, what some of our sample plans that came in. But I'm going to just briefly tell you what the SERE program is, because I'll tell you for a lot of the interests that you all have expressed, the SERE program is going to be important, and it's critical for you to know if you're interested in putting in a SERE Farmer and Rancher grant proposal. For a great many of you, the deadline is right upon you. So for the Northeast, the deadline is literally a week from today. So if you're interested, you want to jump on it ASAP. This program is intended to be a very farmer-led organization. And so it has farmers guiding what are its most important issues. It has programs that are designed to help individual producers try things out and explore them, and then do education so that other farmers learn from what they've done. There are lots of categories of SERE grants, and I really think it's one of the most important assets that you will find. Here's another one. I've mentioned it a couple of times, the Value Added Producer Grant. I knew that there were going to be a few folks here who were interested, and indeed one of our samples will be there. So we'll come back to that as we go there.
Margaret, someone asked, can you apply for a SERE grant if you have one currently?
If you have a SERE grant now, you can apply for anything you want to apply for. Whether you're likely to get it is a different question. I would say, as a general rule, given that funds are tight, it's probably wise to, if you want to participate in another SERE grant, don't have yourself be the lead. Have somebody else be the applicant and you can be a participant. I wouldn't, as a reviewer, tend to expect that somebody who has currently got a grant is going to be my top candidate, because I think they're pretty occupied with what they're already doing.
Correct.
So if you have a marginal role in an existing grant and you want to have a different role in a different grant, or if you ever even want to lead, just make sure that you're not the lead. If that's just, there's not a prohibition against it. It's just strategy. I don't think it would be smart.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we got that question in because it was so timely. Thanks, Pete.
Super good, super good. So we have the assignment last night that we're about to jump into, but just to tell you that tonight's assignment is to take this guide and get familiar with it. Walk through it, and also the other resources that we have given you. Walk through them and say, again, remembering always to ask, can my project advance a program's goals? Not just can it help me, and also all the other questions that we asked. So see if you can identify 3 to 5 possible candidates for some aspect of the work you're trying to do.
Absolutely. I mean, and one of the things that we established yesterday is that this workshop or this particular training is not just when you're on the call. It is full 3 days. So we expect you to do stuff when you're not on the call with us. We're coaches and we can guide you through, and we are here to answer some questions. And if you didn't already know, on November 30th, we'll be back to maybe let you live in it a little bit, and we'll be back to help you do some of that. So Margaret, I also want to know if the slides will be available when this is all over, but I'm
absolutely
sure they will be.
Yes,
but I
they
just
will.
wanted you to say that. Okay,
Yes.
are we gonna go into some of the homework?
Yes, we are. And so I'm going to pull this up on my computer so you all can see it more easily. So we had a bunch of really excellent plans that you all submitted. And we didn't choose these on the basis of anything other than we wanted things that we could actually squeeze in time and that we could put on a page. And so several of you were able to give us ones that could fit on a page. So we're trying to squeeze them so that you can see them. I'm just trying to.
Are you going back to the slideshow?
No, I'm not. I'm going to try to make this slide here that I've got.
Oh, you want to show the other one?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm trying to get this so that you all can see it better. So can you see currently the what do you see? Are you seeing the slideshow or are you seeing?
I'm seeing little slideshow pigs.
Okay, good. So what I'm going to do is come back up here and do a new share.
Okay. Give us a second. Ah, there you go.
Okay.
Got them.
All righty. So I can see all these little animals who are up here looking at this with us. So what we're going to do is just do a quick review. You're going to think that we've done this very, very speedily. And that's because we have 15 minutes to try to cover a lot of territory. Saginaw Community Food Club goals to improve food security and food access and food education. They're going to put a food club in the heart of the city. They want to have food sites so that people can get there instead of shopping. They don't have to get a box. They can come in and they can shop. They don't have to go and just specifically get a box. They are going to work up relationships and partnerships with a bunch of other purveyors, stores, restaurants, farmers clubs. They're hopefully going to be fundraising through July and then beginning in the year 2023. They have funding already. And they have some in the bank and they have a bunch more as pledges. What they're needing is to build. They need building capacity and equipment, and then they need to have a lot more funding that's actual operating capital. So I'm going to focus on those things and tell you that there's a program that I would love to encourage you to turn to in your guide, which actually does have a call for proposals coming up. And that is the Community Food Projects Program.
What page?
I'm coming to that. Give me half a second. It's page 29. And so if you go to the Community Food Projects Competitive Grant Program, you will see that this can range from smallish grants to much bigger grants. It's something that really wants to make sure that it's all about, is the community itself engaged in this? They want to see, first of all, that there's a need. They want to make sure that there is community, not only buy-in, but active engagement and leadership. That this thing didn't just come out because some organization said, we think this is something that ought to happen. They want to know that community members were engaged in it and will continue to be, that it will have employment opportunities that will help support the community, that it will directly engage in helping to build toward community food security. That would probably be my top pick to go for this program. There are undoubtedly aspects of this proposal that you could go to for other sources for building. And that, I will just tell you, for your building undertaking, your construction, I'm wanting to tell you one thing about where we are in the economy right now. I think it would be, if I were in the position of somebody looking for a grant for this kind of work, I would be saying some of this I should be able to get through a very low interest loan. And I would be looking at that. This has not always been that case, and it won't always be the case, but during this period of history, we've got extraordinarily low interest loans, and it would make a lot of sense to go and explore it. Maybe go to the Farm Service Agency or Farm Credit Services and see what might be a possibility. So I'm going to
interrupt you. Janice, her chat just went down. She dropped another link. If you guys are looking at your chat box, make sure you make a note of that, the Investing in Food link. Again, I will say this is a learning community. Margaret and I are coaches. This is great information. You guys be really watching each other's resources. Keep going, Margaret. Thanks.
So sure, the next one that we're going to take a quick peek at is Suzanne Slavens. I saw you come on today, Suzanne. That was great. And this is, I love this proposal, just because I happen to have been an agroforester in the Peace Corps, and I just love agroforestry. So this speaks to my own personal interests. But had it not, it doesn't matter. The point is, what you're trying to do here is work. You've got high school and college students. They're going to be helping to form an agroforestry leadership team. You're going to be working to deliver a curriculum to young children to help them come to understand how to farm, to create food, how to grow food in the forest, in the woods. And you have all sorts of resources at your disposal. You have this nice woods that the church that you've mentioned here has available, and they're glad to have you use it. And you have volunteers. And what you're looking for is funding to hire staff to coordinate it, and also to purchase some materials, trees, shrubs, mushrooms, grow kits and tools and things like that. So a few thoughts. This is a good SARE proposal, just to tell you. I think it would make lots of sense to consider this as a SARE proposal. The other thing to tell you is there are increasing numbers of programs that are coming up as part of some of the Biden administration's new rollout. And I called the Savannah Institute today, the managing director, and talked with Kate Werson, and just said to her that this was a proposal that was coming out. Did she have other suggestions? And she said, they are going to be monitoring opportunities, and they have actually found there are quite a number of other folks around in the upper Midwest or in the Midwest interested in doing K through 12 education on agroforestry. And they're thinking that maybe this is something that they're going to want to sort of maintain and develop like a cohort of interest around. Anybody else who has other suggestions, please put them in the chat box. I just say, I definitely think you should be reaching out to the Savannah Institute and find out if they have some specific suggestions, and stay on their list to kind of find out what's going on. And also, you mentioned the Agroforestry Center. Smart idea. That's exactly where you should go. But if I were looking to put in a proposal now, I would be saying this could be a good SARE proposal. It could be a good research education SARE proposal, but it could also be a good farmer rancher SARE proposal.
And again, thank you everybody for doing your homework. We're still looking at things that came in. You did a great job of getting your objectives identified. We can tell you're thinking through these, so that's good. I know some of your experience, but think about the people that aren't, and now get to benefit from some of the work that you've done. So thanks for doing your work. It really makes this part easy for us.
So did you all have a chance to take a look at this next one? I saw a lot of you looking at this last night online, and this is a frozen food value added processing for export. Does anybody else have opinion? Do you want to put them in the chat box of suggestions of places that somebody here might be able to go?
Thank you, Susan, for saying she'll follow up with the Savannah Institute. If somebody has their link, drop it in the chat, please. I don't have it in front of me.
I think it's
okay. The frozen food value added processing export. Thank you, Annalena. It's in there. The Savannah Institute is in your chat box.
So this is the frozen food value added processing for export, taking some of the seconds with fruit and converting it into some frozen treats and making it into purees that can then be used to make frozen treats. And what they're looking for is working capital for the first several months of the project, plus construction materials and contractors, plumbing, building out the processing facility, and so forth. So does anybody have some suggestions that you would like to make to this one? For this one,
and I'm looking at your chats. I'll read them out if you put them up.
I'm going to say the one first place to start, but not for the processing, is obviously the value-added producer grant program. It is not an easy proposal. It is not the place a person should start if you're putting in your first grant proposal. It is time-consuming, and it is absolutely an important one to use. But I would, if I were you, I would call the person working for value-added producer grant program in your state with the USDA's Rural Development Agency. Every state has a rural development agency. Ask them, for advice, and ask them if they have any other funds. That's a really great resource to find out some of the new funding that's coming down the pike. That's a place, because there's about to be funding for infrastructure, and some of it's going to pertain to food processing. We don't know yet the details, but I would, if I were in your situation, I would have gone to the value-added producer grant program for the pieces that have to do with operating capital. And then for the others, I would call up the staff there and say, who else within the Rural Development Agency might be able to help me think through some of the other sources that we have? Did we have other suggestions coming in on the chat here?
Yeah, they
Okay.
do. And they're
Great. Okay, the Marketing Innovation Grant. Food hubs. Yep, great.
the Fruit Tree Foundation. There's some
Okay, so let's do one last quick one. And also just to say that is also, if, for example, you're going to need to be doing marketing, if you're going to need to be doing, if you need to do a market feasibility study, if you need to do a business plan, those are things that you can get funded through the value-added producer grant program and its planning grants. You also can get them, and I've known plenty of people who have gotten them through the SERE program. So those are very appropriate for not a farmer rancher grant. You probably want to go for a bigger scale kind of a proposal for that, but they do fund that kind of work.
Margaret, there was an interesting question here that I just wanted to raise up real quickly. There was an observation from Anne asking, would it be less likely to be funded, this project, because it's intended for export rather than feeding people locally or nationally?
Yeah, for example, that you wouldn't go, for example, to the community food projects for that, because that's about community food security.
communities. Mhm.
Yeah. So I would say that if it is aimed for export, I would probably want to talk what I would do in the state of Wisconsin. And I can't speak to everybody's state Department of Agriculture. But what I would do is I would go to my Department of Agriculture, because they're, at least in Wisconsin, and I think most states, they actually have within the Ag Department an export person who's working on it. And I would ask if they're familiar with any funding opportunities that could be helpful. That's the first thing I would do. The second thing I'd do is I would, again, go to the USDA's Rural Development Agency and say, is that a restriction? Is that going to preclude my selling? I don't think so, because I have myself reviewed VAPG proposals where it was pretty clear to me that their market included not just the US, but also export markets. So I actually think that what they're trying to do is help put more money in the pockets of farmers. I don't think that they are particular about it has to have a US market, but you should ask. So that's a good question for your state VAPG lead.
Thank you. And just a quick time check, we do have just about 2 minutes left.
Yep. And so we may not be able to get to this last one. I wanted to take one very brief moment to draw out a distinction that came up today when we talked about small grants or small organizations. And groups that thought, like, I'm not really sure I'm big enough to go for one of the bigger grants. And in the community communications I had this morning, I shared that sometimes it might be appropriate to go to some of the foundations. One of the links that we have in our guide is to the foundation directory. Many organizations don't want to pay the subscription, but if you go to your local library, they will have a subscription to the foundation directory online. It's segmented by state, and you can go there and you'll be astounded how many small family foundations there are and other groups that you've not ever approached before. And they divide it out by content, like areas like education or women's issues or health issues or environment. And I just wanted to draw out the couple of differences between approaching a foundation versus approaching an agency. If you approach an agency, that person that you call the program staff, They're there to help any person. They're not there to judge your proposal. They might give you advice. If you're approaching a foundation and they have a program officer, their job is to make a judgment call whether your proposal is something that they want to forward it further or not. And so when you're meeting them, you're advocating them from the very minute you start. And so when you approach them, what I usually do with somebody I don't yet know, I find somebody who's been funded by that foundation. I say, may I use your name? And I write them a note and say, so-and-so suggested that I contact you. And I reach out to them on the basis of the strength of that. And then I say, could we have a conversation? If that foundation says, as increasingly they do, we don't allow people to call us up, we call you, then I ask for one of the people who has been funded, would you please send a note to that foundation and let them know what we're doing is really relevant and see if they might be willing to have a conversation. And as we approach it, that's, it's advocacy from the start. The second thing to say is, whereas a program, federal agency or state agency is got like maybe one time a year, maybe 2 times a year that they're going to have a call for proposals. Foundations have dockets around the year, many of them. You might find that they have 1, 2, 3, or 4 different times in the year when they will entertain proposals. You want to find out when that is and aim to try to meet that. The rest of it is quite similar. The things they're going to want to know from you will be quite similar to what any federal grant program will want, which is what you all have put in your plans here.
Barbara Slattery, can you unmute? Can you talk? She had her hand raised and she's on call. So I wanted to see if we could get her question in. Barbara, can you talk to us?
I think I should be able to ask her to unmute.
Okay. We had a similar question yesterday, but we're trying to, some people had to dial in and they couldn't get on. I will say that every state also usually has a foundation directory by state. There's a Grantsman Smith. It may be, you need to do a little homework for those smaller foundations. And I will also point out that there is a window of time when you cannot talk to foundation and philanthropy staff. That's during the time when they've done an RFP. Between that and the time that they actually award the dollars, they have to be persona non grata, and you won't be able to do that wonderful relationship building that you need to do. So to Margaret's point, when you are looking at smaller foundations, get to know their cycles and know when they can come out and maybe have lunch or come out and talk to you or visit your program, and when they cannot. It's not personal. They have to maintain the distance of neutrality. So just don't take it personal if you call them at the wrong time and they don't call you back, or they said they can't come out. There will be a cycle when they can come and visit new programs. The other thing to do for you smaller people, get some social media or get a news article that you can then send that foundation and say, look at all the great work that we're doing. Would you like to support us? So that helps you too to build some of that relationship with the smaller grantees. Just a couple of little tidbits. I don't know if we could get her. We tried. I don't think she's in, but let's keep moving.
I think we're there. I think we've gone. We didn't have time to do 4, but we did get 3 in, and that was good. And we are hoping that again tonight you're going to have a chance to go through this guide.
Play those links. Guide. Get on those links. Get familiar. Play around with them. There's a great how to get started video in the SAM.gov. Is community learning. Start there. Look around, and we want to see, come back tomorrow with at least 1 or 2 resources that you think will match up with what you're trying to fund. The idea here is that you're going to start to look at how you match up with, keep in mind, here are the tips. Number 1, is it reasonable? Your timeline. And Margaret gave you the real tip of the day, and that is, make sure that what you're doing is something that the funder is trying to advance. This is a win-win, right? This is what we talk about as a win-win. If you're trying to advance the mission of the funder and you write a credible case study, you're 50% ahead of the game when it comes to getting evaluated to get this grant. Now, of course, your other documents have to be in order, but let's keep in mind that you're looking for who matches what you do and not just who can help you. So that was pretty much. Any other tips for today?
I think we covered it, and we got great input and great questions and a lot of exchanges through the chat box. Thanks for that. Looking forward to tomorrow and hearing from you all tomorrow. Thank you again, everybody who were the brave souls who put your own plans out there for us to consider. Sorry we couldn't get to more, but you sure did a great job in getting some real structure to your ideas. It was really fun to read. We got a lot of exciting projects out there waiting to be funded.
Right. And there was one other question about people in Hawaii that said they get bounced out because of their land being expensive and their population being small. Look for grants that don't use that as criteria. And let's talk about how good the program is and how it can help your area. So there's many ways to approach it. It is not all by census data, so don't be deterred by that.
Great point. Thank you so much. That's a really important.
All right. We'll see you guys tomorrow.
Talk tomorrow.
Play on those sites. Play on those
grant
links.
writing tips tomorrow.